Good morning, everybody. We are going to get started. I think people are still cycling in. All righty, good morning. Hello, everybody. My name is Matt Samuelson. I'm with the Donald K. Foundation. First of all, I just want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy day to come and join us. There's a lot of familiar faces in the room and a lot of people that I'm looking forward to meeting during the day. And I would just encourage everybody during the course of the day to get up and talk to all the other folks here. There's a lot of expertise and there's a lot of knowledge to be gained from each other. And so I hope that even though we're at tables, that people can get up and move about. Couple of quick logistical things. We have people assigned to tables because we're going to be doing some design work. However, as you look around your table and you realize that there's only 2 of you at the table because we're still filling in, feel free to get up, move around to a different table. And what else? There are some charging stations on both sides of the room. If you could charge your devices there rather than the plugs in the wall, that would help us keep the lights on. I think help yourself to coffee. There's food over here as well. And then restrooms are down this little corridor inside this room and then back to the right. So on behalf of the Donald K. Foundation, the Gates Family Foundation, C Trust, and the University of Colorado Denver, thank you for being here. I'm just going to introduce Paul Teske real quick. Paul is the Dean of the School of Public Affairs here at the University of Colorado Denver. He's been the Dean since, I guess, 2008. Paul is heavily involved in public policy here in Colorado for education. Governor Ritter appointed him to the P20 Council back in 2009. And Paul is also on the board of Great Ed Colorado and Get Smart Schools. And just wanted to say thank you. Appreciate you having us here in this space. And if you wanted to say a couple of words, that'd be terrific. Thanks, Matt. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Matt, and thanks to all of you for being here. I know some of you have come from quite a distance, but on behalf of the University of Colorado Denver, with our big sign lit up, and hopefully the lights do stay on, we're delighted to have you here. As Matt said, I'm Dean of the School of Public Affairs, and through our Buechner Institute of Governance, we do a lot of work on education policy, education reform, with many of the partners here today, including Gates Family and Legacy, and especially Donald K. Foundation and Tony Lewis and his great staff, who I think have really been pushing this issue, high quality blended learning, using the best of online technology with the best of face-to-face teaching for quite some time in this state, and I think really being an impressive voice in moving it forward. We're also proud that Matt and Kim Now-Stolen and Yolan Shen are graduates of the School of Public Affairs and all part of the Donald K. Foundation empire and staff. So really my job is just to welcome you. I will say in higher ed we're dealing with some of the same issues. I mean, we do a lot of our graduate programs online now, and that's becoming increasingly popular, but we do find that hybrid approaches seem to work better in some cases when they're possible and when they're done well, and certainly some of the national research on higher ed is showing that as well. And at the higher ed level, it also appears that every university is now officially freaking out about MOOCs, the massively open online courses, and trying to figure out who to partner with and what the future of that looks like and whether people will actually finish those courses, because if you follow this, 100,000 people sign on for some of these things, and maybe 1,000 actually finish, but that's still 1,000 people finishing and doing it for free in some cases, or very inexpensively. So I think the future of higher ed in terms of these hybrid models is very much a fascinating one and very interesting and important, but also obviously for you in K-12. My other job is to keep things moving fast and to introduce our first major player in the event, and that's Ethan Gray from the C Trust. And the C Trust, as you see on your material, stands for Cities for Educational Entrepreneurship, which is obviously an important part of what we're talking about today. So please join me in welcoming Ethan Gray.
Morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming this morning. I'm Ethan Gray. Cities for Education Entrepreneurship Trust is a very long, unwieldy name, so we just call ourselves C Trust. We're a network of 29 city-focused education reform organizations, and the Gates Family Foundation and the Donnell K Foundation here in Denver are members of C-Trust. We've been doing a series of these blended learning design workshops in cities across the country. This is our 4th out of 6. And the goal is to help our partners in different cities think through what it takes to build a vibrant ecosystem for blended learning. At the macro level, our goal at C-Trust is to create vibrant ecosystems for education reform in general, with blended learning being one of the core strategies that we're exploring. We are thrilled to have some of the nation's leading experts on blended learning with us today. Joe Bleidinger from Public Impact, John Watson and Amy Murren from Evergreen Education Group, Scott Ellis from the Learning Accelerator. We've got some wonderful local speakers as well who have some deep expertise in blended learning and can talk a little bit about what's happening in Colorado. So the purpose of the workshop today is to develop a shared understanding of national trends around blended and why it's important, why it's relevant in the national education reform conversation, to talk through some of the choices and trade-offs that are part of implementation, thinking specifically around what high-quality design looks like and what it means to do blended at a high level, not just sort of layering technology on top of instructional strategies that are already taking place in schools. And to work through a design exercise to think through what blended could look like in your context, in your districts, in your schools, and to try to stimulate a conversation locally around what it takes to implement these models at high fidelity. Just a quick note about the focus. So today we're focusing on school-level transformation. I know that there's been a lot of work already sponsored by the Donnell K Foundation, Gates Family Foundation, and others, the State Department of Education here around blended policy. Colorado, I think, is leading the nation in this conversation about blended. Denver, in particular, is ahead of a lot of other cities. And so I know that we're coming into the conversation with having the ball sort of already started rolling. But we're going to really focus today on school-level transformation. We think that stakeholders really need to think through the implications of blended at the school level before we tackle the policy pieces so we don't get a cart before the horse situation going on. We also want you to hold the questions that aren't about school-level blended today and take advantage of our Yammer online network that you all now are part of, whether you like it or not. You can choose to use it. We hope you do. It's incredibly easy, and it's actually really powerful. It's connecting people like you who have participated in these workshops in other cities with a vibrant online network of practitioners and grant winners from the Gates Foundation Next Generation Learning Challenges. There's some information in your packet about that grant opportunity. There's going to be funding available for implementation, design and implementation grants as well. We'll talk a little bit more about that throughout the day. So thank you for putting on your school hat and thinking as an educator today. Just a quick run through the agenda. We've got a session coming up on sort of the basics and the overview of the Colorado landscape. We're going to talk to some Colorado practitioners. We're going to think through how blended learning is relevant to you as educators and district leaders, charter leaders. We're going to take a break. We're going to talk through some strategic levers that are the most sort of important drivers of blended. So models, what kind of blended model do you want to think through? Do you want to implement in your school? What is the implication on staffing? We're going to get to eat, which is a good thing. We're going to talk through what it takes to speed up the adoption of blended, and we're also going to talk about the content of the curricula and the content of the materials, as well as use of data. And then we're going to talk at the end about managing the transition and managing the move to a blended environment, which is a challenge in and of itself and worthy of its own conversation there. So with that, I think we'd like to turn it over to Amy from Evergreen. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ethan, and thank you to Donnell K. It's really nice after doing these workshops around the country to be in my hometown. I got to sleep in my own bed last night. That was pretty exciting. So, good morning. That's what we needed. Give me a show of hands. How many of you are already doing something involved in online or blended learning? Yeah, that's what we thought was going to happen in Denver. You all are ahead of the game. We've been doing these workshops around the country, and in general, Colorado is doing a lot in both online and blended learning, charter schools, district programs. So forgive me the next 15 minutes if you could be up here doing this presentation yourself. I see many faces in the room who could, but I'd like to give just a quick overview of how we got to this point, how we got to the point where we're offering blended learning, and talk about some of the benefits, and then we'll talk a little bit about the models and about some successful school models around the country, some national models that we can look to for some inspiration. Thank you. We good? Excellent. So, this is a picture of a classroom that looks a whole lot different from a classroom that you or I might have visited when we were in elementary or high school. We don't think necessarily that students are learning any differently than they did 80 or 100 years ago, but we do believe that we have a far better understanding of how students are learning now. And because of that, our goal is to create far more interactive and personalized learning environments for students that help more and more of those students be successful, and more students be more successful. Blended learning has evolved from online learning. Many of you have probably read or are familiar with Clayton Christensen and Michael Horn's book, Disrupting Class, which in 2008 predicted that by 2018, 50% of all online courses would be, 50% of all traditional high school courses would be offered online by 2018. And we're about halfway there, and we believe that, in fact, that prediction is coming true. In Colorado, we have, I believe it's 55 authorized programs by the Department of Education. 31 states have authorized fully online schools across the country. 620,000 course enrollments were served in state virtual schools last year. We're seeing a huge increase in online and blended learning around the country. When we surveyed Colorado rural schools last year, we found that 85% of our survey respondents, so it's probably a little bit biased, were involved in some form of distance learning. Now, that could include interactive video, and in fact, about a third of Colorado's rural schools are still using interactive video as a form of distance learning, but the significant majority are offering some form of online learning. So let's dig in and talk about the benefits. First and foremost, individualization. You might learn at a different rate than I do. You might learn at a different learning modality. Blended learning allows for students to succeed in an environment that makes the most sense to them. This shows, this graphic shows the rate at which students are mastering modules in Khan Academy. Our student in blue started out at the bottom of his class, and if you were in a typical but pretty good brick and mortar classroom, there would probably be ability groupings. He probably would have been grouped with the low ability students, and he probably would have had to move at a fairly slow pace that accommodated all of the students in that group. Instead, he was allowed to move at his own pace, where you can see some thicker dots. That's where he spent a little extra time mastering a module. You can also see some jumps when he moved ahead fairly quickly. By the end of the class, he was third in the class, and he had mastered about 70 of the content modules that were presented to him throughout the year. And in fact, it's double what a lot of the students in the class did. So blended learning allows for this customization. All of that comes through data and feedback. So benefit number 2 is that blended learning allows us to learn more and more about individual students because of the data that's available in learning management systems and content management systems. Traditional education is based on a fixed time model where students progress based on bell schedules or based on school calendar, and as long as they're doing okay, and as long as they understand the content, and maybe they're getting C's, maybe they're getting D's, maybe even the occasional F, they're still going to move forward because our brick and mortar schools, for the most part, need to keep going, and we can't wait for all students to master all content. Blended learning allows for the possibility of competency-based learning. And I'm sure you've all heard a lot about competency-based learning. There's a lot of chatter about it, and a lot of chatter about how to implement it within current structures. But competency-based learning allows students to progress when they actually master content. And so time becomes the variable. Students are given more time to master the concepts, just like we saw in our Student Mastering Khan Academy content modules. He was given a little extra time in some areas and was able to scoot quickly through areas that he mastered quickly and understood quickly. This isn't just about the student. It's also about helping teachers to be more effective. Our teachers have access to the information in that learning management system and in the content management system. So blended learning takes the best of the online world, that flexibility in time, place, path, and pace, merges it with the best of the brick and mortar world. And the data that is generated from that interaction allows for synergy in the relationship between the student, the teacher, and the content. One of the other benefits of blended learning is the opportunity to create flexible staffing models. My colleague Joe is going to talk with you at length today about some of the possible staffing models that we're seeing around the country, and some that are possible because of the flexibility of the blended learning environment. Cornerstone Health High School in Detroit recognized that teachers play 4 different roles in the typical classroom. They're focused on rigor, they're focused on relationships, they're focused on relevance to the outside world, and last but not least, they're focused on discipline. They have taken those 4 roles and separated them into 4 different staff members, allowing teachers to specialize and focus on what they're really good at. So it's not just about helping students be the most successful, but it's also about helping teachers be the most successful. Last but not least, cost control. Depending on your role in a school, that concept is either really scary or really exciting. Let's be clear that we very firmly believe that teachers are at the heart of blended learning. That blended learning is about creating a transformational educational experience. It's about creating something that helps more students be more successful. This isn't about getting rid of teachers. It's about helping everybody be more successful. This is an example budget from Kip and Power. Kip and Power was struggling with reduced budgets and a need to increase their student-teacher ratio, which started out at 20-1. And they were able to shift staffing and create an overall student-teacher ratio of 28-1, while still finding significant time in each student schedule for 10-1 small groupings. So those are our 4 significant benefits. And here's our bottom line definition. We're taking the best of the brick and mortar world, the teachers, the relationships, the interactions, that one-on-one time or small group time, and we're merging it with the technology and then using all of that data to create an amazing experience for students. Many of you are doing this in your brick and mortar classrooms. Many of you are doing this in the online classrooms in some form or another. Because the reality is that this has been a slow progression over the course of many, many years, if not decades. We do believe that blended learning is about more than the technology. It's about more than adding smartboards to a classroom, about more than adding laptops to a classroom. Those can be great educational tools. And when used well, they can transform the educational experience and perhaps can even be counted as blended learning. But they aren't necessarily blended learning. That might just be a technology-rich experience. I stand in front of classrooms of teachers and auditoriums of teachers on a regular basis. And the bottom line is that this isn't a trend that's going to go away. We believe blended learning, within a few years, we'll all, and in fact I've heard Tony say this, I think standing right here at this podium, that within a few years, blended learning is simply going to be learning. It's simply going to be education. And it's not going to be this crazy new thing because it does work and it does improve the process for more students. So where do we start? That's why you're here today. And we're excited to walk you through some design exercises to help you think about how to improve your program or how to start your program, depending on where you are in the process. But the bottom line is you start with an educational goal. You might be wrestling with a number of educational goals in your school or your district, and that's fine. We all are. But we need for you to think about one particular educational goal today. It'll help you as you move through these design exercises to have one challenge in mind so that you're trying to create a measurable outcome that will make a difference for your students. You might want to expand your course catalog. You might want to individualize instruction. You might need to offer advanced placement classes for the first time. There are a variety of reasons why you might choose blended learning as an option. But choosing one goal will determine the path that you take to create the best program. And there are 4 areas that we're going to think about throughout the course of today and that we encourage you to think about when designing a program for your students. First, the model. If you did your pre-reading or if you've read any of Insight's papers, you know the different blended learning models that they offer up, and those will be our context for today. Will a flex model where your students have some serious flexibility in their schedule, maybe you don't even have to show up to school on certain days, would that work for you? Or is it an in-class rotation model? Are you including a computer lab so that there's an external rotation model in your class, in your school? But that model and which model you choose will help you figure out how you can be flexible in terms of the content that you adopt. It will also help you figure out what technology makes the most sense for you to adopt in your school or your classroom. What learning management system, what content management system, what student information system. Will you launch a device program? Either bring your own, or will you have a laptop program in your school? And by the way, I should note that my colleague John will be digging into content and technology a little bit more with you this afternoon. And last but not least, staffing. As I mentioned, Joe will talk about staffing because blended learning allows for flexibility in how we use the staff members in our schools. And then we get to the fun part, because you get to identify and prioritize your assumptions and start implementing a program. And it's not just about implementing, throwing it out there, and assuming that it's working, but rather learning from that data in the learning management system and the student information system, tweaking the program, and coming back around and implementing again and improving it for all students. So let's just look at a few examples of national models of blended learning that are out there now and how they're solving some of their problems. We mentioned Kip and Power, and you'll hear about them a couple different times today. They experienced budget cuts and realized that they needed to increase their student-teacher ratio. Carpe Diem. Many of you have probably heard of this charter school model that started in Arizona and has expanded to Indianapolis and is going to continue to expand. They also experienced budget shortfalls and lost their facility. First Line Schools in Louisiana was struggling with flat student test scores, and they weren't pleased with their school performance index. Alabama Access recognized that not all students across the state of Alabama had access to the same course catalog. Colorado Online Learning did a study a few years ago, and Marianne Pena corrected me recently and said that the numbers are actually even worse now. But in rural schools, they determined that the average rural school had a course catalog of about 25 to 30 courses, and suburban and urban schools actually have catalogs of 200 to 250 courses. And so Alabama Access wanted to address that problem. And last but not least, in Chicago, they recognized that their students were actually going to school 25% less than some students in other urban districts. And so they wanted to figure out a way to extend the school day. And they've all identified creative solutions to these problems. Do any of these problems sound familiar? Seeing some head nodding? Yeah. Kip and Power increase their student-teacher ratio to 28:1, but maintain those 10:1 groupings. Carpe Diem now delivers a high-quality education to students at a per-student cost of $6,639. First Line Schools has improved its school performance index by 8 points. Alabama Access is now one of the largest state virtual schools in the country. I believe it served about 80,000 course enrollments last year. And all students in Alabama now have access to all AP courses. And last but not least, Chicago Additional Learning Opportunities has extended its school day by 90%, making it more competitive with urban districts around the country. So there's your foundation. That's all the basics you have to suffer through if this is old hat. But now I'm going to hand it over to Amy Anderson, who is going to talk with you about what's going on a little more specifically in Colorado. We've released... that's not the slide I was expecting to see. I had a lovely intro slide for you at some point.
I can just stand up here.
Yeah, okay.
Which one do I push this one? Yep. Good morning. It's great to be here. And I know that there are some of you in the room here who will have seen some of the information that I'm going to share today. But I'm going to actually take us, I know the focus of this primarily is on school level blended learning, but I'm going to take us up to the state level for a little while here just to talk about the context in which our state sits right now relative to our ability to actually implement blended models and what some of the trends have been over time in terms of the use of online and blended learning in Colorado. The results from some studies, as some of you know, I spent the last year and a half before returning to Don L.K. at the Colorado Department of Education, and I was overseeing online and blended learning in that role. And when I came into the role, initially there was a barrage of media attention, as many of you might remember, about online schools and questions about the effectiveness. And what we realized right off the bat was that we really didn't have good data on our online schools in order to be able to realistically say what was and wasn't happening in online learning and what were the either the opportunities that we wanted to pursue further or the challenges that we wanted to try to alleviate going forward. And so we embarked with support from Don L.K. And the Gates Family Foundation on looking more deeply at what the data looked like and what some of the trends were in online learning. And we partnered with UCD as well in part of this research. So I'm just going to give you an overview of some of the key findings of that because I think it helps tell the story as to what we might want to think about as we go forward with more blended models. So to start, this chart is just showing you that we see an increasing demand in our state for online learning. If you look at 2003, the enrollment in online schools, and this is full-time online schools, was just over 3,000 students. When we jumped to 2011, that had jumped up to over 16,000 students, and the numbers are continuing to grow. And so we know that there's a population of families and students out there who are seeking online learning for various reasons. Oh, these are the 3 studies that we did, and we also had support from Evergreen on one of the studies. This must have been the introduction slide. What we've also seen over the years is a trend and a shift in the demographics of students who are seeking online learning. So back again in 2003, we saw more of what was probably more of a homeschool population, a younger student base that were seeking online learning, often as an alternative to homeschooling. We've seen that dramatically change over the years, where the population of students in our online schools is more reflective in terms of free and reduced lunch of the population of our state as a whole. And with that, we've also seen a real shift in terms of the students who are seeking online learning. Again, in the earlier years, it was about half elementary school students. That's completely shifted now, where we see more than half of our students in enrolled in online schools that are secondary students, high school students in particular. And so, as I'll show you in some of the later slides, there's something going on right now with our high school students where they're seeking online learning as an alternative to what they're getting in their brick and mortar schools. We also are finding that despite the fact that we know people are seeking online schools, we're also not seeing results from the online schools and for students at the rate that we'd like to see. The graduation rates in online schools are much lower than that of our average brick and mortar schools, and the dropout rates are also considerably higher. And so that's a challenge, something that we are all working together to try to figure out how we fix that. We also are seeing that mobility in online schools tends to be much higher than that of regular brick and mortar schools. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit more in some other slides about why that might be the case. And we have some experts in the room who I know could chime in at some point about that as well. So in general, while we know that people are seeking online schools, we are seeing that the results, whether it's in the early grades or in the older grades, aren't at the level in terms of student performance that we would like to see. We also are seeing that, well, that's I guess all it is. What we're seeing though is that, here's where it's interesting, is students are seeking online schools, but the students who are seeking online schools in large part are students who also haven't been as successful in their brick and mortar schools. And so we have a growing population of students who are seeking something different, whether it be more flexibility or another kind of alternative, and they're looking to online schools. But if you look at the 30.6%, the yellow under the 2009, and the 44%, we're seeing that the students who are coming in, and this is coming into 9th grade in online schools, are coming in at considerably lower in terms of their grade, their proficiency, than the average student would be at that level, which is the 60.9% at the bottom and the 62.6%. And so we're seeing students who are looking to online schools, hopefully for something that will help them get through or be more successful than they've been able to achieve in their brick and mortar schools. So what this shows us is that this isn't just a problem of online schools. This is a problem with the population of students who we need to better serve in different ways. We're also seeing that if you look at the 22.3% here at the top right, that a lot of students are coming into our online schools having been in multiple schools before seeking an online as an option. And so we have a number of students who are highly mobile, and then they come into the online schools, and as the earlier slide showed, they might still be highly mobile students, but they were highly mobile prior to entering online schools. And so again, as we think about blended models, I think that we need to think about how we serve the students that are seeking these different options in ways that will best meet their needs. And I think it's going to have to be through some more of a combination of a blended model that is able to meet their needs in terms of their academic needs and needs for flexibility and other kinds of reasons why they're seeking online, but also allow them to be successful. Now here's some of the research that came out of the work that we partnered with UCD on. So in addition to doing some quantitative analysis on what was happening with students in online schools, we also did a survey and a series of interviews where we talked with parents, students, teachers, and school leaders who had experience with online schools. And what we found was that students that were seeking online schools hadn't been as successful as I just was talking about in their brick and mortar schools. They were seeking online schools, and they were finding that they were seeking it because they wanted to have a place where they felt they belonged more. They were seeking it because they wanted kind of more socio-emotional support. They weren't getting the kind of support from the teachers in the brick and mortar schools than they were seeking from their online schools. And so these are some of the very reasons why if we think about how we better serve the population of students who are not finding success, whether that be in brick and mortar or online, these are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about in our blended models in order to be able to better meet the needs of all students. A lot of students were talked about why they left their brick and mortar schools, and illness was the primary reason. But when we dug deeper into that, we realized it wasn't that there were a bunch of homebound students. That was certainly part of it, but it was students who, for various reasons, weren't wanting to go to school because they didn't feel safe, they didn't feel well in their brick and mortar environments. Students chose online because they thought it was going to be a place where they could have more flexibility, they could move more quickly through the school, graduate early, finish school, making up for failed classes. But when you look back at the students that are coming into online schools so far behind, it's a real big challenge for online schools to be able to get kids who are coming in 9th grade at 30% proficiency to be graduating by 12th grade and get them through quickly. Parents are tending to continue to choose online schools more for a lot of the reasons they chose them early on, which is safety for their students, wanting to have more of a homeschool kind of environment. But the challenge here is that while we have parents who might be more involved in some of the earlier years, in some of the elementary models of online learning, as the students get older, that parent participation tends to decrease. And so it's increasingly important for kids who are seeking online schools to continue to have some source of support if in the home or with some kind of a mentor that can help push them and guide them along the way. These, again, are some of the reasons why students are seeking online schools. A lot of times it's students who really do need flexibility. So as we start to think more about blended models, this idea of flexibility and support and having communication from teachers is critical. So again, these are some of the things that I've already gone through. Students are choosing to graduate early, yet what we're finding is that that's not actually what's happening with many students. Students are entering far behind. And as we looked at those earlier slides, when a lot of the online schools were set up initially to serve a certain population of students, as that population of students has changed over time, how can we work together to figure out how we adjust and create programs that are more geared towards the population of students who are seeking the schools? And again, I know that the online schools are working on this. I believe that as we think about blended models, these are critical components to keep in mind. I talked about the parent involvement, that it's key along the way. And I truly believe, I just spent the last couple of days in Dallas visiting some schools that have been more high-tech schools, not necessarily blended schools over the years, new tech models, if any of you are familiar with that. They're moving more to blended models now that are integrating more online and including extending the reach of teachers across multiple sites across the country. And what they talk about as the most important thing that they have to ensure is right before they push forward with more blended is that the culture in their schools is at the heart of what makes them successful. And so as we continue to think about blended models or more online or more personalization, the idea of culture and collaboration needs to be an important part of, I think, the conversations that we're having in order for us to truly be successful with kids. Now, the challenge we face in Colorado is that we don't have a lot of supply of supplemental. And now this is changing. There are districts, there are organizations that are starting to form that are expanding. There's Colorado Online Learning that are expanding access to supplemental courses, meaning that if you're in a small or rural community and you have students that want to have access to teachers or content that they can't get in your local community, that there's starting to be a growing supply, or more choices for you. But it's still not where we need it to be in order to truly have more online and blended options for students across our state. By and large, Colorado students, and I'm going to show you a map in a couple minutes, have much less access to supplemental options than students in other parts of the country. And the infrastructure in our state, broadband access and other means of being able to even connect to online and blended learning is still lacking in Colorado. So as we think about what we need to do at a school level, we also need to think about what we do at a district and state level in order to even be able to do these kind of blended models that we're going to be talking about today. This is from the Keeping Pace report that Evergreen puts together every year. And if you look, this is where Colorado sits in terms of the number of supplemental courses that were provided last year through our state supplemental provider, which is Colorado Online Learning. Now, again, we know that there are districts like Boulder, Jeffco, Douglas County, Academy, a variety of districts that are starting to do more of this work in terms of providing blended options for students in their districts. We don't have that data captured, but as of right now, we sit pretty low. And so when we talk about kids in Colorado having access and opportunity in the same way as kids in all these other states might have to blended and online learning, we have a lot of work to do still. And then lastly, this is the national broadband map with Colorado. The dark area in the middle is where there's broadband access. As you see coming out into some of our more remote and rural communities, we still have a lot of work there to do with infrastructure and expanding access. And I know Yolande just did a blog post on this that you all should check out. Is it on Ed News or is it on our website? That really starts to look at the challenges we have with broadband, especially as we move towards online testing. And if we want to be expanding more blended learning, then we need to make sure that districts and schools are equipped to be able to access this. If not, we have a continuing kind of equity gap that we're seeing where some kids have access to things that other kids don't.